3 o'clock, so I guess we can go ahead and start. Let's go again by saying who we are and who we represent so people watching knows. I'm Jim Farrell and I represent the citizens at large. Alex?
Unmute. Alex Duffy with MIG, consultant project manager, and have been assisting with the HB 2001 implementation for the city.
Greg?
Greg DiLoretto with the Transportation Advisory Board.
Charlie?
Charlie Matthews with the Planning Commission.
Darren? Gustav?
Hi, Darren Gustorf with Icon Construction and Development.
Mary?
Hi, Mary Baumgardner, City Council alternate.
Roy?
Roy Bielostowski, City Council.
Scott?
Scott Irwin, Planning Commission.
Vicky?
Vicki Olson, Committee on Citizen Involvement, alternate.
Shannon Eilis?
I'm representing the Westland Economic Development Committee and the Westland Alliance.
Shannon with an E?
Hi, Shannon Knight, representing CCI.
Has joined the meeting.
Vicky, I got you, I believe. No.
Yes.
I got everybody, Darren. Oh, there's Carrie. And who do you represent, Carrie?
You're muted, Carrie.
I guess so. I'm an alternate for the Planning Commission.
Hey, did I miss anybody? Dan.
Hey Jim, Dan Tedder here, representing the CCI group for Westland.
Yeah, I think I got everybody. So let's move on in and let Darren come in with the role of the working group and our purpose and the meeting guidelines.
All right, thank you, Jim. Let me pull up my packet here. So again, this has just been a recurring agenda item, just to keep everyone focused on the goal and the purpose of the working group, maintain consistency, and try to avoid scope creep with the group. So again, let me scroll down here. So again, the goal of the 2020 working group will recommend a code amendment package for each of the 3 projects. The House Bill 2001 implementation, which again is the focus of today's meeting, clear and objective standards for housing, and then Chapter 96 street improvement construction. And again, the working group will provide input on the 3 projects by reviewing, discussing, and revising the draft code amendment packages, meet monthly, addressing HB 2001 first, moving on to Chapter 96 and then clear objective standards. So again, I've provided that in your packet once again. And then I've also provided the 2022 working group meeting guidelines in your packet that the group agreed to at the last meeting.
Okay, you want to do a review of the meetings, or does anybody have any questions about the review that was put out?
So yeah, so the first task with the agenda item 3, Jim, would be the approval of the summary notes from the previous meeting.
Okay, anybody want to make a motion to accept them or reject them?
So moved.
Amendments?
Second that.
All those in favor, just raise your hands on the screen. Okay, that works. Okay, hey, we're moving right along now. So let's go ahead with the discussion package, and I'm going to turn that over to Alex. And then Alex, what we're doing tonight too is that after your presentation, I'd like to give everybody 5 minutes so that everybody has an opportunity for for what they want to talk about and to understand, what they understand what we're doing.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, Jim and
Alex?
Yes.
Yep, sorry, this is Darren. Sorry to interrupt. I was going to do a quick recap of the last meeting so we can set up what Alex is going to talk about, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the meeting to recap. So again, if you think back to the last meeting, there was a lot of information provided to the working group. It included examples of middle housing types in West Linn. There were some photos with sizes of those units in the packet. The consultant team provided the middle housing concepts that illustrated how the setbacks, FAR, and lot coverages impacted the different types of middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhomes based on the size of the lot. So that was sort of to visualize the conversation that the group then had about FAR and lot coverage after that. There was a table of proposed changes to FAR and lot coverage that included some increases in FAR and lot coverage for the R5 and higher density zones, including townhomes. That table was provided again in today's packet on the in the memo on the third page, I believe. Yes, the third page was where the discussion was based at the last meeting. Then at the end of, so the bulk of the last meeting, if you'll remember, was focused on that table and talking about which zones could possibly allow a little bit of an increase in FAR or lot coverage, which zones shouldn't. And that was sort of the homework for this group to sort of wrap your head around what proposed changes you would want to recommend. So the primary tasks that came out of the last meeting, again, this is in your packet again on that page 3. So again, the primary tasks for today would be, should there be an increase in FAR for the R10 or R7 zones for middle housing types? Can FAR be eliminated in the R5 and denser zones for middle housing types, or should it be increased as recommended? Confirm no maximum lot coverage for the R5 and denser zones as proposed for middle housing. And then should smaller lots be open for additional density by increasing FAR and eliminating maximum lot coverage? Again, that's related to number 2 and 3 that I read, and it's again on page 3 of your packet. And then at the end of the meeting, everyone agreed to submit comments within 2 weeks, which was March 7th, based on the pretty extensive code package that is before you. And several folks did, and there was a summary of all of those comments, again included in the packet, and that will be the discussion that Alex is going to lead as the next agenda item. So again, so for the discussion today, included in your packet, and I hope everyone's had a chance to look it over, was that comment and response log. So we've logged the comments, how it relates to House Bill 2001, responses, and then whether or not we made any changes to the code based on the comment. There was also an FAR lot coverage options table. So I believe Carrie, Scott, and JJ all submitted some alternatives to the original table we looked at. Those are summarized in that table. So again, hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at the table. We supplied all of the written email comments so you can see what everyone had submitted. And then there's also then the updated code package. And there were some changes made based on the comments. And again, those were identified in both the comment log and then also on page 4 of your packet lists out the changes that were made, and then the changes are in blue in the code amendment package. So the original proposal, the changes are red. The additional changes based on your comments are outlined in blue in the code amendment package. So I will not read the 10 changes on page 4. You can all hopefully have read it or look at it yourselves now. But yeah, so there were some substantial changes made based on your comments to the recommended code amendment package. And then the last thing, and then I'll turn it over to Alex real quick. So Shannon Knight sent in some additional comments. I forwarded that email to you this afternoon. Hopefully everyone had a chance to look at it. We can address Shannon's comments as part of the discussion. And then Carrie Oakes also sent in some comments, and I forwarded those to you this afternoon also. And they were just general comments about what she recommends the working group.
Did you say page 4?
Page 4 of your packet, yes, includes the 10 changes made to the proposed code amendments based on this working group's comments that were submitted.
Yeah, they're not in blue, but that's okay.
Yeah, they're not in blue on page 4, but in the actual code amendment package, they're in blue.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I've covered everything, and I'll turn it over to Alex, and he's gonna. Well, Alex and Sue are gonna lead the discussion about moving towards consensus, and then, as Jim was saying, do a temperature check with everyone on how close we are to finding consensus on the different items. And again, primarily, I think we're to the point of the FAR and lot coverage, unless there's something else outstanding that the working group.
Shannon Eilis has something she wanted to say.
Oh, I just wanted to tell you, Darren, I did not receive either of those emails. I found the information on the website, but I just wanted to let you know I'm somehow not on whatever you're using to send information out.
Okay, that's good. Did you get the packet email last Wednesday?
No.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll check your email, and I apologize for that, but
that's okay.
Yeah.
Darren, can you double check mine? I'm just looking. I didn't see it either for this meeting. Stan Tedrow.
Okay. Yes, I can do that also, Dan.
Thank you.
Nor me either.
Yeah. Greg, I talked to Greg about this because I got a bounce back email from Greg. So there was a phishing. I don't want to get off topic here, but there was a phishing scam with the city, and it corrupted our email addresses. So some of our outgoing emails have been blocked from other email sites. But so if you're not getting emails from me, yeah, just please let me know, and I'll make sure that we get it resolved.
Roy has a question also.
I was just going to say, yeah, I've had problems with my email. Just check your spam folders. A lot of times when I send something from my city email, it goes into someone's spam folder because of the phishing attack. So it might be in your spam folders, everybody.
Thanks, Roy. All right. Well, with that, I'll turn it over to Alex and Sue, and they can lead the discussion from here.
Great. Thanks, Darren. And thank you for everybody for taking the time, to provide comments. In your packet, you've seen there were a lot of comments that we were able to collect and to be able to, to I think really critically of how those could apply to future code amendments to implement HB 2001. I think you'll also notice, in the comments, what we tried to do, we try to attack this from, a few different levels. What one is required for the city of West Linn to be able to, implement House Bill 2001, and then other comments which were also relevant in many ways, but are not necessarily required of the statute to be able to to have to implement your code or implement within your code. And so when we thought about that, we added all the comments as a comprehensive list so that you can see kind of our thought process as we started to move forward through updating the code and the draft code that you have in front of you, and identifying specifically which ones were used to amend the code that you have in front of you today, while others either weren't germane to the topic or are potentially things that you might want to talk about in the future but aren't necessarily part of this specific project. So when you think about that comment log, there's a lot of stuff in there, and we wanted to make sure that you saw that we did see that, but also to acknowledge that not everything is related to the work that we're doing within this group to be able to implement state requirements. I think that the biggest pieces for this obviously are, and whether we want to talk about it or not, we will talk about it, is FAR and lot coverage. We did cover that a lot in the last meeting. For the most part, I think it's great to reflect on kind of where we started with this project, in that your code is already in pretty good shape as it relates to House Bill 2001. And so the code changes in general are relatively minor, with the exception of those things that we're going to be talking about today. So when you think about kind of the list of changes that we have to make as required by state requirements, they are fairly minor, which is great, which means that a lot of your code was already in very good shape before we even started with this project. As we step forward, Darren, we have one more meeting with this group, is that correct? At least part of the meeting, or is this our last meeting?
Nope, that's correct. We have one more meeting where we can address House Bill 2001 if necessary.
Great, thank you. As Jim mentioned, we do want to make sure that we have direction from this group to be able to take to Planning Commission, and we do have Planning Commission representatives on this group. Ultimately, the goal of this working group here is to be able to provide a consolidated list of recommended code changes, but also potentially questions to be addressed by the Planning Commission. We don't have to be in agreement moving forward for this. What we have to have is a set of either policy questions that we still have for Planning Commission, as well as potential changes. So when we think about that end product of what Jim was talking about where we stand on all of this, it's okay to be uncertain. We don't have to have a yes or a no. What we do have to get to is I think this is good. I think this needs some work. I'm uncertain about this. We can document that, and then those are some questions that we can take to Planning Commission. We don't have to have a consensus approval to move this forward into the next step. What we do want is your input, and we want to be able to consolidate and provide that to Planning Commission so they can make informed discussions and make recommendations to City Council moving forward. So I just want to be clear, we're not going to vote on this. What we want to do is make sure that we have the intent of what this group is to move it forward into Planning Commission. Is that fair? Are there any questions about that before I move into the next piece? Planning Commission representatives, are you okay with that move? Like what you're going to be getting on your desks here in the next few weeks? All right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sue, who's going to step through just a brief presentation, talking about some of the changes, and then we'll get into some of the questions that we have, primarily about some of the responses to the comments that we wanted to just talk to you about how best to move forward with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sue.
Thank you. I think I just lost me. All right, can everybody see this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So right at our last meeting, we asked folks to send us your comments and recommendations on the proposed changes.
Sue, before you do that, you have a call out box for giving subtitles a try. Can you turn that off?
Oh,
I think that's us. Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Do you see the back end or the front end?
We're seeing the back end.
Okay.
So we'll see your notes. So we just swap that. There we go.
Okay. It's always kind of embarrassing when that happens. Wait.
Swap it back.
Swap it back. Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Oh,
see,
now it's
okay.
back.
That's so weird. Okay. Well, I'm just going to get rid of my notes then. Let's see. How does that not work?
Yeah, and then just make it full screen. There we go.
Okay. Sorry, I haven't shared through WebEx before, so. I just did want to acknowledge that Darren did send his comments over, and they weren't in the comment log, but they were generally addressed in the comments that are in the comment log, that we can go into detail about those, as we will with Carrie's and Shannon's comments as well. So Darren didn't go over, Darren Weiss didn't go over the code amendments, but I did want to. The first three on this list here really deals with the definitions of duplexes, cottage clusters, and multifamily dwelling units. So we did clarify those definitions, we cleaned them up, tightened them a little bit. You can see the reference pages there. And for this set, we did want to clarify in chapter 18, which is the neighborhood commercial chapter, that all residential will be permitted above the first floor. I think there was some changes saying behind the first floor. So we took that into consideration. We did remove that, and also to keep with the de minimis package. We removed the proposed language that refers to the Willamette Falls Drive Commercial Design District because it was redundant to Chapter 58, which implements that design district. And then we wanted to make sure that there wasn't any confusion between the housing types that were allowed. So we did remove that language referencing middle housing specifically. And then we had internal conversation about the definition of master plan communities per HB 2001 and the admin rules and what that ultimately translates and means for West Linn. We also looked at the definition for plan unit developments. We determined that they were different and one was not similar to the other. So we removed proposed language to the plan unit developments that required some of the specific standards be adopted through the master plan communities definition from HB 2001 or the admin rules. We definitely heard you all on the parking. So keeping with the de minimis package, we have just went back to the required one parking space per unit of middle housing, which is allowed by HB 2001. And then we also removed language referencing the allowance for on-street parking. That would be counted as credit. We removed language in the landscaping chapter because it was not required through HB 2001. And again, we wanted to be to keep with the de minimis package. And that's the same goes for the Willamette Design District, Chapter 58. So we removed that. And then Chapter 65 speaks to non-conforming uses, and the administrative rules really speaks to non-conforming structures, which the state regulations would automatically go into effect anyway. So we felt it was a little redundant to have that in there. One of the, well, not one, but several of the items that we did not change was in reference to the FARs and the lot coverage. So we did feel like there was needed to be a little bit more conversation about that. So the next few slides can just goes over a reminder of what the difference is, as well as seeing the existing FARs and lot coverage against what we had initially proposed and what those options are. I'm hoping that it's clear enough for everybody to kind of see the line between all of them. So again, FAR and or lot coverage plus setbacks plus your building height is going to give you the building envelope and then also the siding. And I should have added building mass and bulk in here as well. So it's not just, you know, FAR or lot coverage. It can be both. It can be one or the other. And then you also have your setbacks and building height that is going to set those standards as well. The image is just a very rough draft or a simple drawing of, this lot coverage topic. This is using a 50% lot coverage. Your hardscape and softscape, that percentage or the square footage of that is going to be dependent on, again, setbacks, as well as other requirements from the city for single family development or residential development. So with that, this table here, what this shows is for all of the zoning to the left here, what the existing max FAR is, what the existing max lot coverage is, which has been adopted in the city's current development code. And then the HB, the italicized comments are what we had proposed. So as you can see, for the most part, we weren't proposing to change any of the lot coverage, but that they wouldn't be applied to townhouses or cottage clusters. As you get into the more dense, the denser residential units, we do propose to up those to increase the FARs to accommodate these middle housing types. And then to summarize, the FAR and lot coverage standard options that we received from Scott, JJ, and I believe Carrie. The first option is really no change, but increasing the FAR for the higher density zones. Option 2 proposed several changes. And the thing with, I wanted to call out here, and the reason why they're in red is the admin rules are very clear that development standards or siting standards for middle housing types cannot be more restrictive than they are for single family detached homes. So the proposed, FARs of 0.4, which is less than 0.45, that would be in direct conflict and would not be consistent and would have DLCD punting it back to us. And then option 3 is really just removing FAR for the residential districts and keeping the lot coverage and having the lot coverage be what then regulates or defines the siting and the mass and bulk. This does not speak to the building height, which we heard in the first phase that the community did not want. And so we don't talk about it here. It's not shown here, but just know that that is, going back to that equation, something that will be regulating how big a building is. Even if we increase FARs or lot coverages, you're not going to be able to build above that without, a variance or some type of due process from the city. So with that, Alex, do you want me to stop sharing my screen so we can just see everybody?
Well, I think before you do that, I wanted to just reiterate. So during the last meeting, we talked a lot about this and, how, lot coverage, FAR, and building height are, it's kind of the big regulatory triggers or factors for kind of scale of building. And so building height there aren't any recommended changes for building height. That was been clear. That had been clear through the public survey we had. It was also clear through the input with this group is that should be maintained. And so regardless of how you look at, lot coverage or FAR, that building height still doesn't change. I think the other piece to consider with this is from a setback standpoint, because there were questions last week about setbacks. Those are also still in effect. And so, where setbacks are either side or front yard setbacks, those are still in effect for all of these. It's really kind of essentially how you look at your backyard in a lot of ways. If you're looking at increasing your site coverage, and an FAR really is just a scale that you could have from floors 1, 2, or 2.5, depending on what's allowed within that maximum building height. So I think these, as Sue said, the changes here and the options that are shown, the key pieces are that you can't be more restrictive for non-single family units than you are for single family units. So we need to at least be consistent with it. But it doesn't mean, for example, like with smaller unit or smaller lots, that actually increasing lot coverage for those uses would still be allowed. And that's something that under option 1, you can see where there's an increase for those smaller lots, potentially to increase the coverage to support more middle housing. So they might seem like small things, and they are to some degree, but it's just something that we need to clarify and make sure that the group is in general agreement for how we move these specific things forward. So with that, maybe Sue, before you close it out, let's take questions, if there are any, on these options or on the two questions that we have at hand with lot coverage and FAR, and then we can close out the screen just to have a broader conversation.
Scott, he's got his hand up, and Greg. So, Scott, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm really glad you guys put this summary together. I think the chart definitely clarifies everything very nicely. I do want to point out a few distinctions, though. My proposal for R10s was not 0.4 for duplexes, triplexes, and quads, but 0.5. So I think that would then meet the administrative rules there.
Yeah.
I didn't fully digest those before I came up with this idea. But yeah, I mean, for the R3 and R2.1, my idea was to do single family homes and duplexes together at 0.55 to discourage triplexes and quads on those smaller lots. Regardless, sounds like it doesn't meet the administrative rules. So whatever, if we go with any version of what I proposed, then of course that will need to change. So just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
No, thank you, Scott. Appreciate that.
I'll change that right now.
Okay, Greg, then Shannon Knight.
Thanks, Jim. Actually, Scott clarified my question, so I don't have it anymore. Thank you.
Okay, Shannon, then JJ.
So I'm actually going to go back to what you started because I didn't comment then because I wanted to look up our rules. But when you talked about that we weren't going to vote and that it was what we were presenting to Planning Commission, I just had concerns that that is not what council directed us to do. So I just want to make sure that whatever we're doing within the bounds of what council was asking for, because what I understood council would be asking us to do was come up with an actual recommendation. So just wanted to clarify on that.
I'm going to bring that up too here in a little bit after we get through with the questions here, Shannon.
So maybe I can start, and Darren chime in here as well too. I think, just to clarify from a recommendation standpoint, the group, it doesn't mean you can't make a recommendation. The question would be more that we aren't looking for a majority rules, move forward. What we're really looking for is there a direction from this group that we would recommend to Planning Commission? We also want to acknowledge that there may be disagreement or questions on the side that we want to also take forward to Planning Commission for them to consider from a policy standpoint. So I think that's, I want to ensure that, we do want this group to move forward with recommendations to Planning Commission, but not necessarily to have a minority opinion. So there could be a recommendation with additional policy questions or considerations moving forward for that, and then to have the Planning Commission have that discussion about what ultimately the recommendation they would want to have to City Council. Darren, is that just going to confirm? Because thank you, Shannon, for that question. This is a good time to make sure that we're getting what City Council is asking us to do.
Yeah. So Alex, I think your explanation now just is correct. Yeah. So we do want a consensus recommendation out of this group. So we can forward the code package to the Planning Commission. And as Alex said, if there's some things that the group feels like needs more attention, we can include that as items that the group feels the Planning Commission should weigh in on. But yeah, we definitely do want a code package from this group, hopefully by consensus, to move forward to the Planning Commission.
I think that was what everybody understood at the beginning, that we would have a consensus, and how we reached it would be up to the group. So let's leave it at that, and then we'll go on to JJ.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to kind of clarify the reasoning behind removing it. I don't want to sound like the one that just wants to get rid of a code, but the concept behind it and understanding what that really means. So as we've talked about, your size of structure and height of structure are limited by setbacks and lot coverage and height restrictions. So for example, if you take the R4.5, so our max lot coverage is 1,800 square feet. Right. And so let's assume you have a 1-car garage in each duplex. So now our remaining footprint for that size of home would be 700 square feet per unit. So if you take away the FAR, the biggest the unit can get is 1,600 square feet. It can't get any bigger than that because the height restrictions limit it from going 3 stories. And so you're really talking about a 2-story unit. So the biggest it gets is 1,600 versus 1,250 in that zoning, I think, or 1,125. So what ends up happening is it is a higher likelihood that the max lot coverage will be maxed out first, right? Because to build the large building area footprint in order to get square footage, because you've got garages and such in there. I'm not sure I'm doing a good job articulating that, and if somebody wants to chime in and maybe help me, but I just don't know that having both of them working together is really, and then really it's going to push a 600 square foot quad if someone chooses to do that. I'm not sure that's the product that the city wants either. So if you push up the square footage, and now this can be a little bit larger unit. That's kind of my reasoning behind it, where I think they just kind of work against each other. And at some point, the lot coverage is going to maximize the square footage, and it's not a drastic difference, but it makes the design of the buildings drastically different, if that makes sense.
Okay, Carrie Pellet.
Yeah, thank you for the previous comments. I guess I'd like to see some examples. Maybe you can provide some, from a design perspective, kind of. That would be helpful for me. But on this, just a question about this particular table. Is this where I might ask my question about planning manager discretion for R10s, or is that something for later?
Darren, I think that if you're able to answer that question, certainly can do that now.
Yeah.
Okay,
So yeah. Thanks, Carrie. Yeah. So Carrie had sent in a comment about having some planning manager discretion to allow higher FARs in some certain zones, and we really want to try to stick to clear and objective standards, which is very, very, very helpful to not only the city planning staff, but also to provide certainty to the development community or just the individual property owner that what they propose will meet the code and not have it left up to some discretionary criteria. And that's typically something that would go to the planning commission when there's discretion involved and not something that the planning manager would weigh in on.
So the reason I suggested that for the larger lots, R10 and higher, is because by the group defining a maximum amount of discretion. So it wouldn't really be, it would be clear and objective. Like you might say, planning manager has the ability to increase FAR or lot coverage by up to, for example, 15% for duplexes, triplexes, or quadplexes. So in other words, it would be a looser standard than single family home. And the reason for that is to encourage middle housing. I mean, I know that in those larger lots versus smaller ones, I think it makes it more affordable too or makes it maybe a better investment for someone who's looking to build to have that leeway, and it kind of encourages densification of those zones. And so what I was looking for there was giving the city a prescribed maximum discretion for FAR and lot coverage for R10 and higher, specifically to encourage densification in those zones. So that's why I suggested that. And I think we could come up with a clear and objective standard for that if the group was interested.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. Yeah, so as you'll see in the table in front of you, like option 2 is a good example of what you're articulating. So for a single family detached home, it would be 0.45, but for a duplex, triplex, or quadplex, what Scott had proposed was 0.5, but what you're saying is maybe even 6. So it
Yeah,
would, it would,
and
it would
then-
be it would be a defined number, not left up to me. So that's
Oh,
what I'm
okay.
talking about, clear and objective. And then JJ's proposal is just to remove FAR for all middle housing types. So I think
But the lot coverage you could increase too
you could, yes, we could increase lot coverage also.
for R10. And I think if you're going to put more than one unit in, that makes sense. But anyway, that's just a suggestion.
No, and Carrie, just for this from a middle housing, from a state required middle housing standpoint, that would certainly be allowed. You know, as long as you're allowing more and not less, that you would comply with HB 2001. So, you know, what you're suggesting, I think, would be consistent with
Okay,
state
thank you.
requirements.
Shannon, do you still have your hand up? Shannon Knight?
Oh, sorry, I just took it down.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question?
Carrie, do you have your hand up still, or are you? It's just waving. It's just waving at us. So.
Yeah. Alrighty. Do you want to go ahead? We have. What else do you have, Alex?
So, I guess Jim, maybe Sue, if you could stop sharing for a second. So let's get back to the kind of the discussion. So we had those initial pieces that Sue outlined, which are fairly minor changes to the code. Those first 3 slides. It's still, I think, the question for this group and getting to that move forward or what a recommendation might look like to Planning Commission. We're still within that site coverage and FAR question, and so I think there's been a couple items on the table that have been brought up. Scott, your modification to that one to make FAR the same for duplex, triplex, and single family in some of the larger areas. Carrie brought up the potential for actually expanding FAR within some of those lower density areas if it's related to middle housing, which would be townhome, duplex, triplex clusters. And then JJ, you also had a comment about why even have FAR as a part of the mix. And so there's still 3 pieces here that I think are fairly independent in how we think about this. But to me, at least, unless there's other issues to move forward, those are the pieces for discussion still to consider if we were to consider what a recommendation might look like to Planning Commission. Are there other elements within the code and within your packet that we should talk about and get out as a part of the group, or should we just focus on those three topic areas and how we think we should move forward?
I think that nobody seems to be saying anything, so I think you're probably whoops.
Yep, Carrie.
Carrie's.
Sorry again. So I had proposed an overlay zone. So let me explain that just so that you know kind of where I'm coming from. And what the overlay zone would do is it would. So look, we need to guarantee to the state that we're going to have 200 and I don't remember the number, 250 units over 20 years, right? That's our minimum. That's what we have to hit. But we're going to open up the code to put them anywhere, and that's just the reality. But we want 250 in 20 years. That's a long time. We know that we're going to get more than that. But what I wanted to do with the overlay was make sure that we prevented zones that were high density, low density, high density, low density. In other words, I wanted to have an overlay where the city would say, yeah, we've got X number of developable or redevelopable lots here. There has to be some percentage that has to be duplex or higher. And that could be flexible within that zone. Maybe, you have a minimum standard and it makes sure that we're spreading the density around the community. And that was the purpose for the overlay suggestion. And maybe it's kind of haphazard, but I want to make sure that we are building as much of a community-like feel as we can within neighborhoods. You know, where it would feel much different down on 43, right? But at least within the communities that we're spreading that around as much as we can, and that we have some minimums to provide to make sure we hit that 250 minimum. And that was the thought. But anyway.
So Carrie, if I can summarize and want to make sure that I understand and the rest of the group does too. So you're talking about potentially some type of overlay, which is, from what how I'm understanding, is almost like a performance metric by area, where if redevelopment were to occur, it would, a certain amount or a certain percentage of housing within that area would need to be some type of middle housing development type. Is that consistent with what you're talking about?
Yeah, and within a zone, you would have some flexibility up to the last lot, right? Where that would be, and then you could also kind of target it where you have high density zones already. Maybe you wouldn't encourage it there. Your zone would encourage middle housing in lesser, lower density areas. Yeah, that's kind of a performance metric. Really, that's exactly what it is. And measurable, and you could chart it and you could track it. Yeah, that's right.
So what are other group members' thoughts on that item? And Darren, I want your perspective too on implementation, if that's something that's been done within the city, or kind of thoughts on how that might be implemented. Thinking about a code change to, because this is a slightly different, this is more of a policy direction in some ways. And so just want to talk about kind of what that looks like within a code or within this recommendation.
I see a couple of hands, but I'll weigh in real quick, Jim, and then I'll let the working group members. So we considered the performance matrix at the beginning of phase 1, and then just the complexity of trying to figure that out led us back to the blanket. Every lot that allows single family detached residential would accept middle housing, and that's been presented to council consistently for the past a little over a year. And so that's the policy direction we've been going with. I think what you're getting at, Carrie, is really the FAR lot coverage discussion that you've been having, right? So if the group agrees that want to encourage middle housing on the R2.1 and R3 zones because they're should be focused on multifamily housing, don't increase the FARs and lot coverage on those lots, and go with what you just said. R7, R10, increase the lot coverage, increase the FAR, focus the middle housing on those larger, less dense lots. And with that, I'll stop talking and let the working group members weigh in.
Niles?
Carrie, are you, what you're looking at, are you trying to prevent, say, you've got single family housing, duplex, single family housing? Is that what you're trying kind of have some procedure for?
I kind of want that. What I don't want is a development of middle housing. I think that the community, I think the community's kind of, if you look at the comments, they're kind of opposed to this whole thing. But they want, I think it was captured well when the consultant said it's not in my neighborhood. But I think we have to put it in people's neighborhoods. And the best way to do that is to have an overlay zone that says, I got to have a duplex here. I got to have some kind of middle housing here. And I realize it's challenging. I'm not saying it isn't. And it's to distribute the development around the community. This is not the place for the PUD discussion, but I mean, I want it spread around. I don't, if you have high dense zones, then you've got all the traffic. Then you got all those things people hate about high dense zones. And if you think about the fact we really technically only need 250 units, I think we can kind of manage those a little bit with an overlay zone, but maybe not.
I think my concern is you're bringing in that high density into an area that does not have that. And I know talking to members of the community are not looking that there should be some consistency in how the code is applied.
Okay.
That's it.
Shannon Knight and then Charlie.
I was just going to say that it sounds like that's a bigger discussion and maybe something for future changes, and we leave out of, we just do what we have to do for, to be compliant for now, and then something to look at with future code changes. Because I mean, I think it's a fair discussion. I just think it's more than we should probably get into with our limited amount of time.
Charlie?
Sorry, Ben.
Carrie, I was going to keep quiet until the 5-minute speaking time, but I honestly, I couldn't disagree with you more. I think that my major concern is the infill aspect of applying this law, and what it's going to do to the existing neighborhoods and the people that came here expecting to be able to live in the community that they bought into. So if in order to comply with the bill, we have to concentrate the multiple housing units in a particular area, so be it. But the infill it'd be hard for me to agree with it. But I had to speak up. Sorry.
Thank you, Charlie.
Scott?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly why I think that we should progress very cautiously with any changes, and any changes we make should not be drastic at this point. Just do something that clearly shows that we're trying to be equal and fair across the board, and not dictate terms for development across the city. I definitely support a free marketplace for development. And of course, like the idea I didn't know I had violated administrative rules, but we can tweak that. And the simple concept here is, looking at the square footage, trying to encourage the size of units that people who want to live in Westland would want, without covering too much land. So that way people are like, oh, I guess I could have a family size home. I just won't have a yard. So there's my trade-off, I mean, so I think we can reach that point where we all still have that little slice of the American dream, with a decent sized home, decent sized yard, and we're able to have still a good neighborhood feel to it. And then, yeah, as far as like the smaller residential zones, like Darren said, yeah, we could pinch the FARs there to discourage quads and triplexes there, since they're already pretty dense. I don't think anyone wants to move to Westland to live in a 350 square foot quad. So we can still allow things by rule, but when it comes to practical development, then it's probably not going to happen. I'm sure JJ is a phenomenal builder, but I don't think anyone's going to want to spend, $250,000 to live in a 400 square foot quadplex in Westland, maybe downtown Portland, but not here. So let's we can work within the standard that I have laid out here, that I think will be acceptable to the broader Planning Commission, as well as the citizens of Westland. So I hope that we can land on something close to what I've laid out here, with some discussion, of course.
So Scott, just to paraphrase, and to come back to kind of what we had on the table before was, essentially those smaller zones, the smaller parcel zones, essentially, to meet HB 2001, leave FAR and site coverage as is. It's kind of the same for single family, duplex, triplex, quad. So those stay the same. The larger lots, R7, R10, others, if I'm hearing you correctly, potentially be able to increase lot coverage and FAR for those to be able to allow more development on those larger lots for middle housing types. And so that could be getting to this size of, up to a 900 square foot cottage cluster for example, which may be more market feasible or buildable compared to like something that would be small. Am I hearing you correctly on that? Other thoughts, JJ?
Okay, JJ has one, then I'd like to make one too.
And we have Charlie as well. So
I would just would like to hear the argument for having FAR at all, because I just want to make sure we understand what that means with the other requirements, because I get a feeling that it comes across that, oh, that doesn't seem realistic to remove something. Like, just making sure we understand, if we remove FAR, what is the concern from everybody?
Charlotte, you have something?
I am opposed to removing FAR, but I just wanted to also tell Scott that I disagree with him too. I just want to be fair to Carrie. I want to disagree with both the planning commissioners at the same time. I don't see that we need to move these changes, and I'll address this in more detail when we have our little roundtable talk, but into R7 and R10.
great, thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, I would like to say something here too, Alex, before you move on.
No, that sounds great. Then I do want to come back to JJ's conversation about FAR. That's another piece we've talked about there. And then Jim, just as from a point of kind of moving people forward, I think it would be great to everybody have their time sooner rather than later so that we can come back to see if we can come to a recommendation towards the end of this.
You want to do this now then, Alex?
Well, I want to make sure we can talk about JJ's comments, have what you have, Jim, and then also Scott, come back to you because you have your hand up as well too. Does that sound fair, Jim? You okay with that?
Yeah, my concern is that we don't put everything in one spot. When we do, we're going to be looking at something like 135th and Vision and Powell and that area out there. And this is not what we want as a city. I mean, the whole purpose of 2001 is to diversify the whole community. And JJ made a good point back when we first started. He's thinking about a duplex. Just imagine the house that you're living in now with 2 doors.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I have to agree with Carrie a little bit that we really, West Linn, we're known as an elitist community. And is that what we really want to be in the future? Or do we want to be more of a diverse, a more accepting of all peoples? And so this is something that I want to throw into the mix at some point in time that we really have to start thinking about. There's going to be more and more people moving into Oregon. You're going to have more people coming in with the climate change. They're called climate refugees. As time goes on, we keep seeing that. And we're going to have more and more of that. So are we going to be a diverse community or an elitist community? And I'll turn it over and let Scott do his question, then Alex.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I was going to say, JJ, that, I mean, I definitely like math to be easy and simple and straight up. And the one thing that I'm going to say as far as like in defense of FARs is because they are coming in handy with this discussion, because then if we want to encourage the development of duplexes or triplexes, then we can do that through this modification of the FARs while not increasing lot coverage. So that way we can protect a certain percentage of the land, make sure there are still trees and green space, while at the same time allowing for more people to reside within the same lot and encourage development of those units. So in the brief argument in defense of FARs, there it is. Thank you.
Okay, Alex, go ahead.
Thank you. JJ, you were writing, so.
Again, to kind of just a rebuttal to that, because FAR becomes the limiting factor in the square footage calculation, the lot coverage gets maximized. So for me to do a 1,250 square foot duplex in the R5 zone, I have to maximize the lot coverage. So it's counterintuitive. If we want to build units that are 1,250 and have a yard, I can't do that in the current FAR calculation. So it's just, in order to get that square footage, you have to maximize the footprint. Whereas if the FAR was not the limitation, I could get a higher square footage, or I get the same square footage without maximizing the footprint.
What are other people's thoughts? Darren, you're a builder as well too. What FAR versus site coverage? Do you want to get into this discussion?
Gonna raise my hand. You beat me to it. JJ, sorry to leave you hanging. And we have, just for the record, we haven't consulted or conversed, but our thinking aligns. And I'll just say this: the premise for the House bills is to not make development, create duplexes and townhomes, but to allow the option to where it becomes feasible. And what I acknowledge the City of West Lynn's doing by bringing in this consultant and recognizing with existing code that there are some hurdles and some boxes that are going to need to be tweaked and refined to make this even feasible. And I think to JJ's point, if I'm correct, is and I second what he's saying about FAR. As we mentioned before, the City of West Lynn's one of very few in the state that have this additional layer of restriction on size. You're already, again, not to beat a dead horse, but mandated by height, lot coverage, your setbacks. That box is built. And when you get into these smaller lots, there's only so much you can do. It's not feasible to build a duplex with 800, 500 square feet. It's just, it's not, it'll never happen. It doesn't work. It's not marketable. A developer is not going to come in and see that as an opportunity to bring equitable housing to the market. So that by pulling that away, and to JJ's question, I think it's a valid question, is what's the fear? It's, and Scott, not to disagree with your point, but I think it needs to be tweaked a bit, because your box is already built, the limitations are already there, and this is another hurdle that's going to restrict the ability to allow these types of products to come online. It doesn't mean development like Icon or Toll Brothers is going to come in and blink an entire project with as small and as tight as we can. The goal is to be diverse, and the goal is to have product that suits every business model. Is going to be, you want product that's going to entice a multitude of buyers. And I think that's the objective of this plan, is to open the gates to allow people to buy a home, a first-time home that's not $800, $900, $1 million. And to do so, the idea of attached or detached duplexes or townhomes that are unique. And I mean, our vision for this, and we have a project that maybe a step ahead of West Linn that's adopted in Oregon City that is going to have single family detached, 3,500 square feet. We have Street of Dreams going on this site. We're also building duplexes and playing with townhomes, same subdivision, a total lot yield of 120 units, but diverse with character and not all the same, not all $1 million, but an opportunity to bring in product that a multitude of buyers can afford. Done tastefully and you know, biased, but I think it's going to be a beautiful site. But it's just another restriction that puts you in this box that the city's recognized. This is a problem. FAR has always been kind of a head hitter between lot coverage and FAR, and it's this balancing act to work. On R10, that's great. You've got plenty of room, you've got plenty of lot, that makes sense. But when you get to these smaller zones and these smaller lots, you're so restricted where it makes the most sense to build this smaller product. It gets so small it's not feasible anymore. So I'm a strong advocate for the FAR going away for those reasons. So JJ, sorry to leave you hanging so long. I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree with you.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. I appreciate that. Rory, you had your hand up earlier. Do you still have something you wanted to say?
Thank you. I was just going to ask, maybe if one member of the development community could clearly state how FAR impacts the building of a house in a negative way from your perspective. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I'm still not quite sure what the concept is.
Let me see if I can articulate this on a single family R7 zone. I think we would all agree throughout the city of West Linn, a 3-car garage is pretty common, if not expected. So the lot coverage on R7 is a max of 2,450. So if I take 600 feet off that for my garage, I've got 1,800 square feet left for the home. Right? Am I making sense? Alex, nod your head if you agree with my math as I go through this.
Sounds about right.
So I got about 1,850 left. My home is now, I can only build a 3,100 square foot house with FAR. So if I have a 3-car garage home on an R7 lot, I cannot have bigger than a 3,150 home with a 3-car garage. So you can't put a 3,400 square foot home on that lot, even if that's what the market wanted. I would be interesting to see by a show of hands, what's everyone's square footage of the people that live in West Linn on these larger homes. It's probably more than that. So it just limits your ability. So like when you bring that down into the quads or the duplexes, now you're talking about even to get a realistic square footage with a garage, it's impossible. When you look at like the R5 zoning, the proposed quad unit at 750 is very difficult because your lot coverage is so 750 times 4 would be 3,000, right? But you're controlled by 2,000 of the main living area, or the lot coverage area is 2,000 square feet of that. So you end up with 500 square feet on the lower floor and 250 on the upper floor, assuming no garage. So if you put a garage on the lower floor, now you can't do it, right? Because you can't go 3 stories here because the height restrictions bumps into that. If you could go 3 stories, then you could put the 750 above. So
I think go ahead, JD.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to articulate, and if you were sitting here and I could draw pictures, I'd probably be able to explain it a little bit better. But it just kind of limits you unnecessarily because, again, the lot coverage is what dictates lot coverage and height restriction. The height restriction with lot coverage is basically a 2-story building, period. So all of that square footage has to happen on 2 floors.
Carrie and Scott. Carrie?
Scott was first. Scott was first.
First. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why we have you here, Darren and JJ, is to, bring practical application of the math. I mean, one thing though to be mindful of here is that, I'm thinking of these other families, as Jim has mentioned, we're trying to increase the diversity of the people living in West Linn. And so we're probably going to be stepping away from the 3-car garage household type family, where maybe we're talking about a 1-car household, even if there are kids in it. I mean, if we're looking towards the more distant future where West Linn might actually have a better mass transit system, better access to the city, but that's far out. That's far out stuff. But I want us to make sure that we're all coming out from the mindset of not the current West Linn, but the West Linn of the future when we're crunching these numbers. And so that's the one thing I wanted to throw out for everyone to be mindful of.
Just a real quick rebuttal. I totally agree, Scott. But I guess even more so, I think the other problem with this, though, is that when we start building these triplexes, for example, people are going to say, well, where are they going to park? Well, we got to put a garage in the triplex. So now, again, that garage is taking up lot coverage and therefore bringing the square footage down of the unit, making it unrealistic. And then we never build them because we're not going to build 600 square foot townhomes that nobody wants to live in. But we have to appease the community for the parking situation. So it's just like the FAR just really kind of gets in the way of like sensible things that we would actually go build and execute.
So I want to go to Carrie, and then I do want to make sure we each have time to have a few minutes just to talk about stuff. And there's a couple things on the list that we have about 45 minutes left just to do a quick time check. I do want to get to the question of, is there FAR? That's it. We're spending a lot of time talking about that, which is great. That feels like a big discussion point here. From this group, we also need to think about direction forward. So what does that start to look like? is it a graduated system with larger lots, with more lot coverage and FAR? Should FAR be a part of the mix? We do want to get to this in about the next half hour or so to start talking about what, at least in framework, a potential recommendation might be. And I don't think we're going to get to where we all agree on what that might look like. So I want to make sure we can capture all comments, but I do want to get to where people generally are as we start to move forward, into the next phase of this. So Carrie, you had your hand up, and then Greg, you also had your hand as well. And then let's just make sure everybody else has a time to speak as well too.
Okay, so the thing on the far, if I can just respond to JJ, is that, and Darren, is that what I'm concerned about is a house that's maxed in lot coverage and then extends up maximum to the sky. In other words, to the maximum on the second floor. And what we want here are things that, there's probably market for that. What we want to do is create a market for other kinds of buyers. And so what I would say is, I personally would be open to increasing FARs on mill housing on larger lots, but I would not be willing to support that on a single family home. That's just a concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Greg, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was kind of waiting for the 5 minutes, but it looks like we're not really doing the 5-minute thing. So we have to
We're starting to get into it right now.
Okay. Well, I tend to agree with both JJ and Darren, and the fact is, my issue has always been parking under this whole discussion, and so part of that parking gets eaten up, as JJ has talked about, in building the unit that we want to build. And so consequently, we're like one of the few communities that has this, and we're fighting against the lot coverage and the parking issue. And the fact is, we control the height, we control the bulking of the building, we control the setbacks, we control every little piece of it that I guess JJ and Darren have convinced me I don't see the need to have the FAR because we control everything else. Now, if we didn't control those things, that would be an issue, because then I think how this thing got started was somebody put up a giant building next to a small single family home. But since then, I believe we've controlled everything. In fact, we even control the building mass. I just built a new house in this town, and I had to have a certain number of windows in where I don't even have a room, just so it wouldn't have a blank wall. So we control all of those things. I see no value in crippling ourselves with the FAR, which we need the units to be large enough, given the price of land in this community, to build a building that you can actually market. Otherwise, they won't get built. We won't get any of these things that we want to build because our land is too expensive, given the hillside constraints that we have, given the topography, to build little bitty things. They're not affordable.
Thank you, Greg. So Jim, did you want to step through just to make sure everybody had enough time? And if we could keep it to 3-ish minutes, it'd be great to get everybody's.
I'm just going to call on people and let them talk for their few minutes, and then after that, then maybe we can come to some kind of a consensus to see where you want to go from there. Does that work for you, Alex?
That sounds good. And as you're speaking, it would be great to keep it to, let's keep it to what we're talking about, which is kind of that bulk FAR. Should we think about different scales for these larger zones? Let's try and keep it to that so that we can come back to this as a group in the last 15 minutes or so.
All right, Charlie, do you want to start off this?
Yeah, Jim, thanks. And just for clarification, Scott, I am concerned about the current West Linn. I think that on the Planning Commission and the City Council, we're basically representing the people that are here, and they're here for what they think is good reasons. But past that, well, I see Lynn's host sign up in my screen. Are we still broadcasting?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there we go. While we must comply with House Bill 2001 mandates, and we need to eliminate single housing only zoning and attempt to increase the availability of multi-housing units, I really believe that we should exercise caution in implementation. We should not rush to change our regulations in pursuit of this goal. And as one of our correspondents wrote in, one of our current citizens, you give up something, you're not going to get it back. And I think that we have time to listen to the community and to implement these requirements without rushing into something this important this quickly. So under current consideration, we're now thinking of maximum lot coverage and floor area ratio requirements. And these are important components, and they do contribute, I think, positively to the quality of life in West Linn. And we wouldn't be doing a favor to our current residents in modifying these requirements. Final analysis, they promote the retention and establishment of tree canopies. They enhance privacy. They reduce noise pollution. They lessen traffic congestion. They increase availability of street parking, and they facilitate emergency response. And they also provide us with time for our city council and for our elected West Linn officials to provide the oversight and direction to the development of our code to comply with HB 2001. So we have to manage growth resulting for HB 21, but we don't need to rush to our code and make the alterations to the FAR and to the lot size issues at this time. So right now, I'm only prepared to recommend de minimis changes to our code that's required to meet HB 2001 mandates. And quite frankly, I recommend that to the rest of the working group to do what's necessary to comply, make whatever administrative changes has to be made to bring the numbers into compliance, but not to make other changes that aren't not absolutely necessary. And Alex, you made the request, so I'm going to put it back in your court earlier about what the planning commission would be looking for, not speaking for the other commissioners, but when this gets to our plate, I would like to see a copy of a de minimis code changes, not one with all sorts of other tweaks in it, just what is absolutely necessary at this point to comply with the House bill. And certainly you'll bring in other recommendations and other ideas before us, but it's much simpler for me to see the de minimis package stand alone without other changes alongside of it. So that's what I would be looking for in particular.
Great, thank you, Charlie.
And thank you, guys. Sorry to take up too much time. If I went over my 2 minutes, Jim, I apologize.
Okay, how about let's go to Kim next. Kim Bree.
Oh, we can see
Sorry.
you, Kim. Right.
I didn't have my hand up. Or are you going around the room?
We're going around the room. We're just going, I'm going to people that haven't spoke yet first, and then I'll come back to what everybody else has spoken.
Okay. Sorry. Can you come back to me at the end? I just was kind of caught off guard. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay. How about Tom Watson?
Yeah. So I design houses for a living. So and a fair amount of them end up in West Linn. And so we do come up against the FAR on a regular basis. As a West Linn resident and in the Bolton area, I have some concerns that this will kind of end up in my neighborhood more than some, which is fine, but I can kind of see the writing on the wall. I've got an example. Got a developer that has 3 lots that he just put together on Broadway Street. They're daylight basement lots. He's got them on the market for $350,000, and they're not moving. He just caught wind of what we're all talking about, and now he's going to hold on to them and look into multifamily stuff. So it'll probably be one of the first examples of what we can and can't do. It'll be interesting to see what will fit. One thing with the floor area ratios is basements are not included in that calculation. So these are daylighted lots. So he's going to be able to kind of circumvent some of the concerns out there. Personally, on a business level, I think we could live without the FARs and still govern pretty well over what's being built. That's about all I've got. I appreciate everybody.
No, thank you, Tom.
How about Vicki? Vicki Olson?
I'm here. Thank you. I wasn't prepared to make a statement or anything, but listening, I like what Charlie said. I agree that I would like to see minimum requirements proposed. So that would be where I would stand.
Thank you. Dan Tudlow?
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. I actually don't have any comments at this point.
Okay, Mary Baumgartner?
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's input, and I actually wish that my husband was here because he's the builder, so he knows all of this like the back of his hand. I guess I would like to do as little as possible to still allow for mixed this mix of housing, and what Carrie Pellet was saying about the mix of housing and not have it all be in one area.
Roy?
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Mary, for your comments. I suppose my approach to this has been kind of, I want this group of citizens who aren't on the city council to come up with a recommendation to give us so that we can use that, and I can give weight to that in our decision about how we end up going with the code changes. I have been thinking about FAR and trying to figure out why it is needed in terms of, because I tend to, without being an expert in this, agree with what JJ and Greg said today, which was, and Darren as well, just that if we regulate height, setbacks, lot coverage, and why do we have to have that extra layer? But I don't know enough to take a position on it one way or the other. I need to learn more about that in the next few months. But I just appreciate everybody taking the time to provide their comments, and no matter if your suggestions get incorporated as the consensus or are kind of the dissenting, if you will, I know that it will be considered as part of the record when the city council considers it, and we'll all take your comments seriously. And it's the last comment I'll make is I feel a little badly because this having to go so quickly, I get nervous because I want everybody to have the time they need to make their recommendations, but we find ourselves on the state of Oregon's timeline of June adoption, or else we're mandated to have a code written by LCDC, which nobody wants. So, we're working within the time limits that we can. And I apologize if some of you feel rushed, because I certainly have a little bit, but we're doing what we can. So thank you all for being here, and thanks for listening.
Scott?
Great, thank you. I'll definitely keep it brief. I think that we are able to create a system that works well with what already exists. I think for the time being, as many people have said, we don't want to do anything extreme. So definitely, I think keeping FARs for now is good. And it is an angle that we can use to, at least to some small extent, encourage the building of duplexes and triplexes. With the smaller lots, triplexes and quads, definitely not practical. And that's kind of the idea. We're being equitable as far as the concept of the math and the numbers carrying through from the R10s down to the smaller lots. But what can actually be built, what is reasonable within those lots. conceptually is what I think that we need to be mindful of. So in all, I think that we can maybe do something that's a little bit more than the de minimis, while at the same time stepping forward with caution. Thank you.
Shannon with an E.
Hi, I'm gonna go really briefly because actually someone just walked in. So I sent my comments in of that, like, so I feel like the lower dense or the high density zones are already, able to build these multiplexes. So I have no problems removing FAR from those R2.1, R3, and even other 4.5 lots because they're already super dense anyway. So I don't have a problem removing far from that. But in the higher zone, increasing maybe in the R5 and 7, and then no changes to the 10 and 15 and 20. That would be my recommendation. But I don't think there's any other changes if I'm, other than this FAR question, right? All the other changes have been really removed. All the setbacks and all of the lot size and everything all stays the same. So this is only kind of the only big question here, right?
That's correct. Thank you.
Shannon with an O.
There you go. I'm coming at this from a slightly different direction. As a realtor, I work with first-time home buyers a lot, and I see many of them being priced out of West Linn. I had a first-time home buyer listing last month that had 70 people come through, all first-time home buyers. Most of them got priced out. So I understand there's a huge need for mixed housing in West Linn. What I hear from my clients, whether I'm here or in Portland, is what they don't like is what has happened in Portland, where you have bungalow, and then all of a sudden fourplex that's modern and doesn't fit with the vibe. So I appreciate the fact that Darren was saying that he would do it tastefully. And that is my concern, is there isn't anything to monitor that and keep it within the neighborhood. As far as FARs go, I'm not sure where my opinion lies. I think they're fine. I know that many first-time home buyers would like a little land, but if they had a choice between a little bit of a yard and more house, some would go one way, some would go the other way. So I understand the constraints that to get a little bit bigger house, you sometimes have to give up a yard in a duplex or a quad. So I'm fine. I'm fine with the recommendations that we've made so far. I just don't want it. I just don't want it to be to the point where it's not benefiting those that these houses are being built for.
Darren?
Not a lot more to add. I really, really appreciate everybody's comments, and I don't think we're miles away from the ultimate goal here. Again, not to beat the same drum on FAR, I don't see a need for it for the reasons I stated earlier, but the impact isn't detrimental. If there was a sliding scale and those FARs were increased, and you guys view that as a minimal increase to the basis, great. Anything that will allow a little more opportunity to make this work is beneficial. It's not going to launch if we can't build product that's marketable. And the ultimate goal here with this is, again, not to flood an entire subdivision with townhomes and itty bitty homes. That's not how this would, in my vision, would come together. There's still a market for people that want a 3,500 square foot house and a bigger backyard and maybe a duplex with two 2,000 square footers with very different facades. Detached duplexes would be phenomenal, that are independent homes but still feel the same in scale to the masses. it can be done well. And this is just an opportunity to limit another restriction to allow this to happen. So I'm not, oh my gosh, this has to happen. It's in my opinion, not to belittle this whole process, it's not as catastrophic of a change as I think some people think. This is daunting. You know, the packets and the literature and all the work that's gone into this, it's real, but it's the impact. I don't think it's going to change as much as some people think.
Dan?
Thank you. I wanted to kind of just say thank you, Shannon, with an O, for your comments. I was a first-time home buyer, thankfully, before COVID hit and prices spiked and was able to get in. But, you know, from what I've been seeing, there's just such a shortage of first-time home buying that no one can get into West Linn, and it's just brutal. You know, almost everyone, it's tough. And so looking at what's happening in California, and I really think we're only 5-10 years away from that. You know, I think anything we can do as a community to promote home ownership for those that are younger and even those that are older that are now, you know, kind of competing for these, what we typically consider the first-time home buyers, is going to do great for, you know, the community, right? Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in this rental trap paying market rates for the rest of your life. And it's not really a good equation to, we'll call it financial well-being. So I think if we can do it tastefully, I really support it.
Greg? Greg?
Yeah, I already said my piece.
Okay, JJ?
Yeah, I've said a lot of what I wanted to say. A couple points I wanted to make as other folks have said something. I don't remember. I think it was Tom that mentioned that basements are excluded, and that is true with an exception. You can get an exception, and maybe Darren can chime in if I state this incorrectly, but a certain portion of the basement exterior walls has to be below grade in order for it to be exempt from FAR, which in practicality becomes difficult to do. We do it, but it doesn't leave the best product. So along with removing FAR, I made another comment that at a minimum, below grade FAR should not be included. And I feel pretty strongly about that. The rest of it, I'm kind of with Darren. I mean, I think I'm in support of removing it altogether, but I think we need to look at that below grade stuff because of the topography we have. It's a little bit restrictive, even more so for that type of square footage. I also I mean, minimal as possible. I agree with that. I can get on board with that, but we've all put in a lot of time, and to get here and say we're just going to go with the minimal that the state would have mandated on us, it feels a little bit like somewhat of a waste of time. And I think the negative impact to not removing FAR will be less garages, less parking. That will be the negative impact because we are going to use that square footage for livable space. And I'm trying to make it clear what the reality of having FAR will do. It'll force us to use that garage square footage for livable footage because the units will be so small otherwise that they will not be marketable. So I think that's all I had to say. Yeah, that's it.
Gary?
So I second everybody's comments. I will say, as far as being conservative, at least this first round of code changes, I will say that we have to include the option to allow detached plexes. And my view is if we don't have incentives for those larger lots to densify them, that we won't get them. And so that's my position. So. So you have my recommendation.
Kim, we're down to you now. Kimberly?
All right. Okay, I found the button. This is hard on the phone. Thank you for coming back. I live in a small house on a large property. I'm a gardener, and I experienced firsthand the impacts of zoning changes around the corner from me, where a single-family home became like 12 townhomes with woefully inadequate parking. It impacted the properties, like way past a couple 100 feet in the neighborhood, and the property across the street was threatened by DEQ for fines from all the mud that was washing down in the storm drain. from the impact of the people that were parking across the street that didn't have parking. I have unimproved street. There's a lot of unimproved streets in West Linn. We have to do this or it will be done to us. And what's important to me is that I really appreciate the input from the developers because we need a good end product that we can all live with. And I have friends that have lived in Selwood. I looked at homes in Selwood. I'm so thankful I didn't buy there because it's like up. You've got these big walls with no parking, and they moved out of state. So how do you fill this in and keep it sustainable? And work with our stormwater management and our water system and our street system, and not turf it off on the people that already live here. Yes, we do need to fill it in. It does need to be thoughtful, but it does not need to be at people's expense that already live there. So the more I'm hearing about getting rid of the FARs, I mean, there's so many constraints. I had a friend that wanted to build an ADU, and it was the fees were astronomical before a shovel hits the ground. And I'm so fortunate that the house I'm in was, as a first-time home buyer, is probably going to be my retirement home because I can't afford to move anywhere else. So we got to live with this for a long time. So I so much appreciate everyone's input, and please consider whose expense it's at. How can we do this thoughtfully so that you do end up with a good product that people want to live in, and not leave the neighbors to fight it out of long-term issues because of poor planning.
Okay, I guess it's down to me. Did I miss anybody, first of all? I don't think I did. So anyway, Shannon said a good point that kind of struck home with me. My wife and I are looking to downsize, and we've been looking at condos because our kids live in we have 4 kids in the West Linn School District. And we just go to an open house, there's 20, 30, 40 people looking for these condos or a cheaper housing. And this is what I'm talking about. We need to diversify. What can we do? What can the builders do? What are they willing to accept? What are you willing to accept us to get to the point that we have a diversity in our city? What do we actually need to do? Is it get rid of FDRs? Will that do it all? It didn't do it before. So in a lot of other cities, what I don't want to end up with is something like you see out in Southeast Portland, where you have, affordable housing, but you have everything else along with it. And, you have landowners who don't take care of their property. And so you end up with slumlords. And this is what I do not want to see, is to put everything down on 43 or everything down on any one spot. But when you're looking at a 10,000 square foot property, yeah, then maybe we should have a quadplex there. It's time to really start thinking about that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Okay, Alex.
Well, thank you, everybody. So we have about, just kind of taking notes on where everybody's at. We're kind of like equally distributed, in terms of kind of, the FAR site lot coverage piece, de minimis versus let's do a little bit more. So I wanted to maybe propose something for us to consider as we move forward with this. And it's not just the conversation that we just had where people presented where they're at, but I think thinking more about I think some of the broader conversation, and Kim, I think some of the questions you had about, and Shannon, you as well too, of this thinking about this area is kind of what we want it to be, but also that opportunity to be able to take part of living in West Linn. At the same time, thinking about what those potential impacts might be. Kim, you're talking about parking or other pieces. So when we think about what a potential recommendation might be, how do we get to that point where, Jim, you were saying there's more opportunity with a more diverse type of housing that fits within the context of West Linn and also meets state standards? And so what I started to come to when I was listening to everybody is that, there is that middle ground from what I'm hearing from many people, is that one, we have a number of different zones that have a number of different lot sizes associated with them. We had a lot of conversation around FAR and other elements that may restrict or limit the types of housing that we're seeing within those zones. So, I wanted to gauge people's thoughts on, is there a middle ground moving this forward, at least to Planning Commission, to think about, do we relax FAR and site coverage standards for some of those larger lots to be able to, or on some of the smaller lots to be able to allow or permit some of those different types of housing units? It's not to the de minimis that we talked to, Charlie and some others had brought up, where we just do the minimum what the state says. But we start to acknowledge that we want to see more types of housing within the city. There are pieces that we need to do to start to get there. And there may be specific design considerations that we need to have to make that happen. And JJ and Darren and Tom and others who have talked about those site design pieces, should we start to think about flexibility within certain zones for that? So I want to put that out on the table as potentially a basis for what recommendation might look like. It's not to do as little as possible. It's not to specifically not deal with or not have FAR anymore, because there was I think some strong opinions about keeping that. But do we have some flexibility within zones, depending on the size of those zones, to be able to allow other types of units? That's kind of what I was hearing as a summary to maybe a potential kind of middle ground where we move forward. We have another 15 minutes to talk about this, so we have good time, and so I wanted to just throw that out there to see what people think about. Could we massage that to move something forward? And Rory, you had your hand up.
Okay, Roy, you're first up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to bring up our code on working groups, just to respond to what Shannon brought up at the beginning of the meeting about kind of the process. Do we have to take a vote? How does this work? And I wanted to highlight a couple of sections. One that says, in the event a consensus cannot be reached on any issue, the working group will prepare alternatives. Each alternative and its rationale will be presented to the Planning Commission. And the next section says, when the working group reaches consensus, the proposed code changes will be presented to the Planning Commission. If the working group fails to reach consensus, all proposals will be presented to the Planning Commission. So my point is, no pressure to reach a consensus on an issue. If there's contention in the group or disagreements, both sides of an issue like FAR can be presented to move forward. So I don't want the group members to feel like they have to pick a side or not if they don't feel comfortable doing so. And that comes from chapter 98 of our CDC. So just wanted to throw that out there as we move into the next phase per se.
I appreciate that, Rory, but let's not take the pressure off. Let's talk about this and see if we can move some pieces forward. So I do think, an outcome of this group, and we don't have to, Rory, as you said, agree 100% moving forward. If there are diverse opinions, we want to be able to move that forward to Planning Commission. But if there is a place we can get to in general, I think we should try and do that if the group is okay with that. Is that, Rory, is that fair? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, and I didn't mean to take the pressure off. I just meant to say, if there is something where people feel like they really are split, it seems like on FDR there's a big decent split. Moving forward, that you don't necessarily have to.
Let's make sure we identify it and move it into the next discussion. Carrie.
Yeah. So Alex, I'm not sure I heard people say that they were willing to adjust FAR and smaller lots to encourage middle housing. I think what I heard people say is they're concerned about parking and building structures that are livable. And that's just in general. Personally, I think probably the FAR should be removed on those really small lots anyway. But that's a different discussion for single family construction. But that's just my input. I'm still on the position that we should only allow deviation on larger lots to encourage densification in those areas.
Okay. So Carrie, so that goes back to your earlier suggestion on your comments about allowing a little bit more on those on R10, R7. Scott.
Thank you, Alex. I just wanted to say that I think we should do what we can to try to reach consensus. If we go to the planning commission and say, well, these are our 3 best ideas, then essentially what we're saying is planning commission, you decide. And if you want to mix and match, go ahead. So, and not to put down, once again, Roy, not to put down the idea of like, hey, we can have multiple reasonable ideas here. But, if we want to go to the planning commission in a more unified position, reaching a compromise, then that is going to be a lot more effective in moving beyond the planning commission with whatever idea that we want to put forward, and not just what the planning commission wants to put forward. So I err on the side of doing something that is just, more balanced across the board and not too intense of a change. And I think then that's the point where we can all probably reach a compromise.
Great, thank you, Scott. And we have Shannon, and then
Kim.
And then Kim. And then I do want to come back. What I'd like to do, we have about 10 minutes left. I would, if somebody is willing to put something out there for us to discuss, we can see where we're at, just doing fist to 5, seeing where we're in agreement or non-agreement on pieces, and maybe we can start to develop something to move forward. So Shannon, you were up.
Me, right? Shannon with an E. I'm willing to be more flexible on, the far, the bigger lots. I don't care that much. I'm just wondering if there's a point where, at what percent, like other than getting rid of it completely, which it didn't seem like there was a lot on board for that, but is there a percentage that it makes more sense? I don't know, maybe it's for the builders, but is it like, at 60, at 0.6, or does that not do much? Is there a certain level that is going to have meaningful impact that we could suggest to put out there?
Great, thank you, Shannon. So thinking some number with more to add more flexibility on some of those larger lots. Is that fair?
Yeah, so I don't know, like I think Scott put out, or not Scott, Carrie put out like a 0.6 or whatever or something, right? Is that enough? I just don't know how much of an impact that's going to do.
I mean,
that's why if the builders can respond.
Yeah, my opinion on that is, I mean, honestly, we're talking about such a small number that any number that this group comes up with is completely arbitrary. And the difference between that number and no FAR is, again, such a small number. It's kind of just it like if you look at the difference between 0.45 and 0.5 on the R4 4.5 recommendation, it's like 110 square feet. And so to go to nothing, it might be another 200 square feet. And so it's just like, it just becomes so more arbitrary. So, I mean, if the group wants to come up with 0.6 and 0.7 and this and that, then that's great. And I'm not going to die on the hill for not having FAR, because I'm not going to do that. But I think it's too, Shannon, it's just too arbitrary to say, this is what I think it could be, and this would be better.
Kim?
Because it's arbitrary to begin with.
Thanks, JJ. Kim?
Yes, thank you. I was just thinking, I'm in Sun River right now for a conference, and obviously it's a very different circumstance, and there's plenty of land here, but there is also some areas of density where things are tucked in. There's the separate homes, and then there's the multi-units where it doesn't feel like you're on top of each other. Do we have any examples of where there's no FARs or where this mixed use is successful? Because I think I've heard, and we can all come up with some great examples of where it doesn't work. Do we have cities where this does work? Because that visual impact is huge. Is there a place that can say, hey, this town did this and it was successful? Do we have those examples?
And Kim, we had shown in some previous presentations some examples, particularly of cluster housing. Eugene, Oregon has some good examples. Also, middle housing is historically very common within cities. So, single family zoning as it came in actually started to exclude a lot of those uses. So when you look at traditional development, pre 1950s, a lot of that middle housing was actually constructed just as a part of the natural mix. So certainly we can forward those presentations to you to see if you're interested. But yeah, there are, I think, good examples, also modern examples too. Some agree, some don't about the design of those. But in terms of units, we have seen more of that in existing neighborhoods.
Yeah, I got the examples. Thank you. I was more looking for the modern, like, hey, what have we done moving forward examples.
Sure. So we have about 7 minutes left. So I wanted to just gauge, and Darren, I think we're going to need a little bit of time in our next meeting to probably get to this, but I wanted to see where people are at in terms of, do we have somebody willing to put something on the table for us to discuss? And we can carry this through the next meeting, but I do want to give the opportunity if somebody wants to put something out there for us to talk about.
He's got his hand up. Charlie?
Just a suggestion, probably from here, the Planning Commission, I kind of agree with what we heard about multiple proposals, maybe 3 coming out of you folks, Alex. We maybe start with the de minimis package and then have something that we've been talking about here, mostly like what was in the package we got for this meeting. And then maybe one that is more, has more changes that have been discussed here. I don't know that we're going to reach a consensus unless everybody wants to join my position. So I really think that that the best thing to do would be to, for 2001, is to agree to have multiple packages for the Planning Commission to consider. We're going to bring in the community at the Planning Commission, and this is a great group of people who love West Linn and love what we're doing right here in front of us. But by the time we get to a legislative hearing, we're going to have the neighborhood associations. We're going to have a number of other people come in with their ideas, and we'll get more input. But I kind of suggest that we just go ahead and move forward with maybe 3 different, none, middle, and big.
So Charlie, it sounds like you're putting something on the table. So if we were to do that as a group, do we want to, and Greg and Carrie, I see your hands up as well. Do we want to meet again to talk about refining that? Or do we want to say we'll have a low, medium, and high alternative going to Planning Commission for consideration?
Alex, may I make a suggestion here?
Sure.
We are running out of time, and we always want to end this at 5. And so can you guys put together, you've heard, basically 2 to 3 different views tonight. You've heard it from the development community, you've heard it from the realty community, you've heard it from, the community at large. Is there a way that do you have enough information that you can put together some kind of a package that we can look at for we have one more meeting on this. And I think this is important enough that we put forward at that meeting and then have that discussion there, because everything else, we pretty much worked it over. So can we do that? Would everybody agree to that you put in what you feel to Alex or to Darren here in the next, 2 weeks? Mm-hmm. And that would give ample time for the consultants to move forward and get back to us at least a week before our next meeting, so that we have that information. And then we can talk about that the next meeting, because I think that's pretty much all we're going to be talking about on the next meeting anyway.
Jim, I think that's fair. And probably what I would suggest is, we've been going around that table essentially that we had in the early presentation. So we could go back and make some adjustments to that with some additional narrative. So we could develop a brief memorandum talking about each of those positions, about what that might look like, and then bring that back to you for discussion. It sounds like there is definitely interest in taking that de minimis to Planning Commission. So we may have a de minimis and something else, but that's certainly for this group to decide how we move forward. And Charlie, as you mentioned, and Rory, as you as well, having multiple options, we could take that to Planning Commission, but I would like to make sure we can provide some clear direction to Planning Commission on the recommendations for this group. So we want to be as explicit as we can as an outcome of this group. I think that JJ, as you said, we spent a lot of time on this, and we want to make sure that we get that right for Planning Commission to have an informed discussion. Greg, you're shaking your head. You want to?
Greg, you're shaking your head on this.
Yeah, you're on mute.
I don't think we've done our job. If we want to take 3 positions to the Planning Commission, I think Scott, you said it, we've been charged to come up with a recommendation. And in fact, we don't have to get to consensus. We want to get to consensus, but remember our rules allow for a vote. And so we may also even have to do that. I think what you guys ought to do now is come back with the 3 proposals. Goes from doing basically de minimis to whatever the max is that we've talked about. And then we try to hone in on an option that we can get consensus. And if not, we can do a vote and we can have a minority report. But I think otherwise the Planning Commission is going to go through and spend 6 weeks doing the same thing we did. And so we should have just gone to them in the first place, and we would have all been public testimony.
No, Greg, it's a good point. It's back to my comment where we have been doing a lot of work on this, and we should be able to provide Planning Commission with, direct information and guidance to help make an informed decision. And so if we can commit to coming back to the next meeting and be ready to discuss those 3 options, and if we do need a vote, Greg, we can certainly do that if that's the group's direction. Hopefully we can get to something that's more consensus based. We got a couple more minutes. JJ, you had a comment that I want to make sure we close it out.
One thing that got kind of glossed over, obviously my option was the most extreme of just eliminating it. So the bullet point of the sloping lot would just go away, which I think is an important bullet point. So however we do these 3 options, that, in my opinion, and we didn't get a lot of time to talk about that, so people may not be familiar with exactly what I'm saying, but if that can be kind of a subset, no matter what option we choose, taking into consideration sloping lots and how we can address those, I think is an important point we need to address.
All right, thank you, JJ.
Okay. Can we, we're going to have to close this up a little bit, Alex, and whatnot. And we have one more item on the agenda, and it's the public comment and whatnot. And we had one letter. And Darren, there were some members of this committee that did not get the letter from Carrie Oaks, and also Shannon's with an O, or the Shannon with an E. Their stuff, plus any other written information. So if you would make sure that you have everybody's correct email and come through with it so that we have it to discuss at the next meeting, is that workable?
Yes, I know I have everyone's correct email. It was just a function of getting blocked by your email. So check your spam. But all of this information is on both the project page and then the city council's or the city's meeting page, where the link to the video is, and all of the information is included in the details of that meeting. So it should be easy to find. If not, give me a call and I can direct you where it's at.
Okay, anybody else before we sign off for the night? Because I think we're just about done, aren't we, Alex?
Yeah, I just want to, so Darren, just in terms of comments from this meeting, our next scheduled meeting, can we just talk briefly for a minute about schedule for that? If there's any additional comments coming forward for us to develop recommendations, it would be great to have that within the next, say, 10 days or so we can develop something that's, applicable and, cogent for us to talk about at the next meeting. And actually, I think our meeting we went a week late here, so we might be tighter if we have this. Is our next meeting 3 weeks out, Darren?
No, our next meeting is still 4 weeks out. So
okay.
I would say comments, any further comments, I think 10 days is good. That would be just say next Friday, April the 8th. And that would give us a couple of weeks to turn around a memo, as Alex was saying, with explanations, and then sounds like we're going to go with the 3 options and then work towards consensus and then a possible vote if necessary at the next meeting.
That works. Does that work for everybody? All right, folks. Well, I guess let's adjourn, and it's been a kind of delightful meeting tonight.
No, it's a great conversation, and it's solid. So I appreciate everybody's time.
And I do appreciate it. And yep. So everybody have a good week or two, and let's get back together and see if we can't